Welcome to this training on CACFP meal pattern requirements. The learning objectives for this training are identifying the food components for breakfast, lunch and supper, and snack meal pattern in the CACFP program. For each meal pattern, there are minimum serving sizes that must be served for each component and for specific age groups in order for the meal to be considered reimbursable. We will also review foods that are considered creditable and non-creditable in the program. Throughout the presentation, I'll also include tips about best practices. So let's get started. Before we can learn about meal patterns in CACFP, we need to recognize the food components that are used in each of the meal patterns. All CACFP meal patterns are built around the same 5 meal components. Those food groups or components are fluid milk, meat alternate, vegetables, fruit, and grains. Each component stands alone in the lunch, supper, and snack meal patterns. The breakfast meal pattern combines the veggie and fruit component. In the upcoming slides, we will go in depth and learn about each of the components. The first component we're going to discuss is the fluid milk component. There are 3 different fat contents that are allowable in CACFP meal patterns. Those are whole, 1%, and skim or fat-free. A reminder, fluid milk must be pasteurized. Fluid milk has to be offered in the breakfast, lunch, or supper meal patterns. It is optional at snack. It is also optional for suppers served to adult participants. Additionally, yogurt may be served in place of milk once per day for the adults only age group. Non-dairy milk substitutes identified as nutritionally equivalent to milk may be served in place of milk to children or adults with medical or special dietary needs. Let's test your knowledge. Which fat content of milk can never be served in any of the meal patterns? Is it A, skim milk, B, 2% milk, C, 1% chocolate, or D, whole milk? If you answered B, 2% milk, you're correct. 2% milk may never be offered or served in any of the CACFP meal patterns. The CACFP meal patterns require that newborns through 11-month-old children are offered only breast milk or iron-fortified formula. Another component of every meal pattern is fruit. As previously mentioned, a serving of fruit must be offered at breakfast, lunch, and supper. It is optional at snack. While fruit is typically offered at breakfast, please be aware that a vegetable serving can be served in place of fruit. More to come on that later. Fruit can be offered in many forms: fresh, dried, canned, packed in water or light syrup, frozen, pasteurized 100% full-strength juice. A best practice is always to serve a variety of fruits in various forms. A couple of things to remember when serving fruit. Dried fruit credits at twice the volume served. A 1/4 cup of dried raisins credits as a 1/2 cup of fruit. Juice may only be served at 1 meal or snack per day. This rule sometimes gets confusing as menu planners think because a completely different group of children may eat breakfast and an afternoon snack, that would allow them to serve juice at both breakfast and snack. That is incorrect. As previously mentioned, juice can only be served at 1 meal or 1 snack per day. The next component we're going to talk about, and that can be served as part of the meal pattern, is vegetables. As previously mentioned, a serving of vegetables must be offered at lunch and supper. It can be served at breakfast and snack depending on the menu planner. Vegetables can be offered in many forms: fresh, frozen, pasteurized full-strength juice, canned, or dried. Again, best practice is always to serve a variety of vegetables in various forms. Did you know vegetables are also able to be served to meet the entire fruit requirement at lunch or supper? Keep in mind that 2 different kinds of vegetables must be served. A couple of things to remember when serving vegetables. Raw, leafy lettuce credits for half of the amount served. As you can see on the slide, a half cup of romaine credits as only 1/4 cup of vegetable. Vegetable juice, like fruit juice, may only be served at 1 meal or snack per day. Grain is another required component at breakfast, lunch, and supper, and optional at snack. At least 1 serving of grains per day must be whole grain rich. Whole grain rich foods are foods that contain 100% whole grains or contain at least 50% whole grains, and the remaining grains in the food are enriched, bran, or germ. We'll discuss what and how to determine if a food meets whole grain rich criteria in future slides. The CACFP crediting and whole grain rich requirements apply to all grain products and recipes, including commercial grain products and grain foods made from scratch on site. Let's review some of the requirements specific to the grain component. At least 1 serving per day must be whole grain rich. Grains that are not whole grain rich may still be creditable if they meet certain criteria. Grain-based desserts do not count towards meeting the grain component. This slide shows examples of common whole grain items used in CACFP menus. This list is certainly not all-inclusive. Please refer to Exhibit A, Grain Requirements for Child Nutrition Programs, for a more complete listing. Let's review some additional requirements specific to the grain component. Grains are credited based on ounce equivalents instead of servings. We'll look at some specific examples to help understand that requirement. At breakfast meal, a meat alternate may be substituted to meet the entire grain requirement up to 3 times a week. 1 ounce of meat alternate is equivalent to a 1 ounce equivalent of grain. Don't be fooled. These statements alone do not qualify a grain item as whole grain or whole grain rich. Oftentimes, when you see the symbol whole grain rich on a product, you could assume that that may meet requirements for CACFP, but you need to look at the ingredient label or have a product formulation statement. Also, watch out for tricky wording on products that may mislead you that they are whole grain rich. The words made with whole grains, made with whole wheat, contains whole grains, and whole grains can be very misleading on the packages, and again, may not be anything that will work for the CACFP meal patterns. So what does work? Let's talk about the 6 ways to determine whether a grain meets the whole grain rich criteria. Each state has a WIC-approved whole grain food list. WIC is an acronym for Women, Infants, and Children and is part of the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program. Another method is specific to breads and pasta only. The Food and Drug Administration has established a standard of identity for whole wheat breads and pasta. To be considered as a whole grain rich using this method, look in the standard of identity chart and find the product. The product must match exactly to a product in the list to be considered whole grain rich. The rule of 3 requires you to look at the first 3 grain ingredients that appear in the ingredient list on the product package. Also, we can look at documentation from a manufacturer or standardized recipe and know that anything that meets the whole grain rich criteria for the National School Lunch Program also works for the CACFP meal program. Here are the examples of the FDA whole grain health claims statement. Diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in total fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol may reduce the risk of heart disease and some cancers. You may also see printed on a package this other example of the FDA whole grain health claims. Diets rich in whole grain foods and other plant foods and low in saturated fat and cholesterol may help reduce the risk of disease. Again, products with one of these health claims on the package are considered whole grain rich in CACFP. The rule of 3 is another method to determine whether a food is whole grain rich. The rule of 3 looks at the first 3 grain ingredients that appear in the ingredient list. Now, you know the ingredient list is printed on the food packaging of products. The list includes information on flours, grains, and other ingredients that are in the product. The ingredients are listed in order of quantity. If a whole grain is listed first, you know there is more of that whole grain than anything else in the food. In this example, we are looking at an ingredient list for cheese pizza, including the pizza crust ingredient. Using the rule of 3, we see that the first grain ingredient is a whole grain, namely white whole wheat flour. The second grain listed is brown rice flour. Brown rice flour is also a whole grain. The third grain listed in this ingredient label is enriched flour. Enriched flour meets the criteria for an enriched grain. Here is a comprehensive list of whole grain ingredients. These are the ingredients that when you're using the rule of 3, you would be looking for as the first ingredient. This is an example of enriched grain ingredients, bran or germ ingredients. Again, using that rule of 3, you would be looking for the second and third ingredients to have these ingredients, or of course, they could have the ingredients, the whole grain ingredients listed as well for it to count. I want to draw your attention to the list in the bottom right-hand side of the slide, which provides examples of non-creditable grains or flours. Using the list on this slide and the previous slide will help you determine whole grain rich items in your menus using the rule of 3. Grain products credit using ounce equivalent instead of servings. A 1 ounce equivalent is different than a 1 ounce serving. Grain products credit based on weight, except for cereal, grains, and ready-to-eat cereals, which credit based on cups. In the previous slides, we identified whether a grain item is creditable and may be used in our menus. The next step is to identify how many ounce equivalent grains a particular item meets. A document known as Exhibit A, Grain Requirements for Child Nutrition Programs, groups food into categories and then, based on weight, identifies how many ounce equivalent grains a grain meets. Let's dig into this a little more. Exhibit A is broken into, as I mentioned, it categorizes foods into different groups. So let's explore those groups and see examples of what food belongs to each group. Group A has food items like saltines, hard pretzels, breading on a food such as chicken nuggets or a corn dog. Group B, some examples here include hamburger or hot dog buns, sliced bread, pizza crust, taco shells, or tortilla chips. Group C includes pancakes and waffles. Group D is where most muffins are found. Group E includes French toast when it comes to CACFP. While there are numerous food items listed in this group, those grain items are not creditable in CACFP meal patterns. Group F and G contain dessert-type grains and again are not creditable in CACFP meal patterns. Group H includes pasta, rice, and cooked cereal. Group I is the ready-to-eat breakfast cereals. Let's look at some specific food items, which group they fit under, and how to identify the ounce equivalent grains they can credit for. Remember, we've already identified that this particular dinner roll meets the criteria as either a whole grain or whole grain rich item. Now we need to identify how many ounce equivalent grains it contributes to the meal pattern. In this example, we find dinner rolls listed under Group B. While it doesn't say dinner rolls in this group, we know that the ingredients in this dinner roll is similar to those found in bread or hamburger or hot dog buns. If you were doing this in your facility, you would use a small kitchen scale and weigh the dinner roll. In this scenario, we're going to say that the dinner roll weighs 28 grams or 1 ounce. For purposes of meeting our meal pattern, this dinner roll credits as a 1 ounce equivalent grain. Let's look at this blueberry muffin. We've already identified that this particular blueberry muffin meets the criteria as either a whole grain or whole grain rich item. Now we find blueberry muffins listed under Group D. Again, using a small kitchen scale, weigh the blueberry muffin. In this scenario, we're going to say that the blueberry muffin weighs 55 grams or 2 ounces. For purposes of meeting our meal pattern, this dinner roll credits as a 1 ounce equivalent grain. A word about cereal. When looking for cereal that is creditable for CACFP, ready-to-eat breakfast cereal must contain no more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. Ready-to-eat breakfast cereal is found under Group I. Cereal is based on volume, such as cups instead of weight. Cereal must meet whole grain requirements and sugar limits in order to be creditable. Also noteworthy, the type of cereal. Notice in the middle column, flakes and rounds, puff cereal, and granola all have different volume requirements when it comes to determining ounce equivalent grains. This table identifies whether a cereal you want to serve meets the sugar limits in CACFP. The left-hand column of the table lists the serving size of the cereal. The right-hand column of the table shows the amount of sugar that can't be exceeded in order for the cereal to be creditable. In this example, the serving size is 3/4 cup or 30 grams. Looking on the right-hand column, find the 26 to 30 gram row, and now reading across, the table shows that the cereal can't exceed 6 grams of sugar. Now turn your attention to the nutrition facts. Look down that nutrition facts until you see total sugars. In this case, we see that the total sugars are 5 grams. We know that we can't exceed 6 grams, so this cereal is creditable for CACFP. The last component is the meat alternate component. The meat alternate component is a required component for lunch and supper meal pattern. It is optional at breakfast as well as snack. The meat alternate component is measured by cooked weight or edible portion served. The CACFP meal pattern lists the required amount for meat and or meat alternate as ounce equivalents. Here are examples of creditable meat alternates in CACFP meal patterns. You can serve lean meat, poultry or fish, tofu, soy products or alternate protein products, cheese, eggs, dry cooked beans or peas, peanut butter or soy nut butter or other nut or seed butters, yogurt, plain or flavored, unsweetened or sweetened. The following may be used to meet no more than 50% of the requirement: peanuts, soy nut, tree nut, or seeds as listed in program guidance, or an equivalent quantity of any combination of the meat alternate of any items in this table. Menu planners cannot determine the amount of meat alternate component in a product by reading a nutrition facts label or ingredient statement. If a commercial processed product does not have a CN label, CACFP facilities must obtain a product formulation statement from the manufacturer that indicates the product's meal pattern contribution. The example on the slide is an example of a CN label, or some people call it a CN logo. A CN logo says a product meets requirements. If the CN label or logo is not located on the packaging of the product, it can often be found by just Googling the product on the internet. You can see that the CN label has a very distinct border with CN in 4 different spots. It says that it tells about how the meal pattern contribution works. It has a 6-digit product identification number. It has a USDA FNS authorization statement, and it has the month and year of approval. The other way to determine that a meat alternate is creditable is a product formulation statement. The product formulation statement identifies how the food item credits for the meal pattern. A product formulation statement is a document developed by manufacturers that provides specific information about how a product credits towards the USDA meal patterns for child nutrition programs. It generally includes a detailed explanation of what the product contains and indicates the amount of each ingredient in the product by weight. The product or the information on product formulation statements can vary among manufacturers because these forms are not monitored by USDA. Required information for product formulation statements. To document a product's crediting information, the manufacturer's product formulation statement must list the product name, product code, serving size, and creditable ingredients. It needs to indicate how the product credits towards the USDA meal pattern requirement. In this example, you can see that a 4.76 ounce serving of fully cooked Fun Nuggets credits as a 2 ounce equivalent of meat alternate. Other information needs to include documentation about how the manufacturer obtained the crediting information by citing specific child nutrition program resources or regulations. You'll notice that information on this statement in gray. The last thing you always want to look for is to see that the information has been prepared on company letterhead with the signature of a company official and the date of issue. The signature can be handwritten, stamped, or electronic. Yogurt can be credited as a meat alternate in CACFP. The required serving for yogurt is based on volume, cups, or weight, ounces, and is the same for all types, flavors, and fat contents. A half cup serving or 4 ounces credits as 1 ounce of meat alternate in CACFP meal patterns. Table 1 shows the meat alternate crediting information for different serving sizes of yogurt. There are many ways to determine if a yogurt meets the sugar limit requirements. We're going to talk about that. So not only does the yogurt have to meet certain size requirements, so many cups, so many ounces, whatever, but we also have to make sure that we don't exceed sugar limits in our yogurt. So we're going to explore the table method for yogurt as it's the easiest and fastest way for determining if a yogurt item meets the sugar limit requirement. This method features a table with common sizes of yogurt and pre-calculated sugar limit for each size. So you can see that the yogurt in this table, the serving size is listed in ounces or grams, and then the sugar limit is then listed on the very right-hand column. You can find a link to this resource on the training resources slide at the end of this presentation. So in order to determine if a yogurt is creditable and does not exceed the sugar limits, you need to look at the nutrition facts label. First, find the serving size of the container. In this example, the serving size is 150 grams. Find it kind of at the top of that under nutrition facts. Now direct your attention to the table on the right. The middle column of the table displays serving sizes. In the third row down, you see 150 grams. Next to the right of that, you see that sugar must not exceed 20 grams. Return to the nutrition facts label and locate the amount of sugar in this product. It's circled and shows that this product contains 16 grams of sugar. Because the grams of sugar did not exceed 20 grams, we know that this yogurt is acceptable to use in CACFP meals. This table is only for reference as the serving sizes of yogurt are in much smaller increments and assists you with determining whether the yogurt meets the criteria related to sugar. Again, Googling CACFP sugar limits in yogurts table will help you find a table that best meets your needs. And again, there is a resource link for that on the resources slide at the end of this presentation. The forms of yogurt listed on this slide are not creditable in CACFP meal patterns. Those are drinkable, homemade yogurt, frozen yogurt, squeezable yogurt, yogurt flavored products such as covered nuts or fruit, and yogurt in commercially prepared smoothies. We spent a great deal of time reviewing the food components that make up CACFP meal patterns. Now we're going to move our attention to the age ranges and serving sizes needed to make a meal creditable and reimbursable. Here we go. Each meal pattern is broken down by the age groups listed on this slide. Minimum serving sizes for each of the components are identified by age group in each meal pattern. The first meal pattern we're going to discuss is the breakfast meal pattern. In order to be creditable and reimbursable, you must serve all three components. You are allowed to serve a meat alternate in place of the entire grain requirement a maximum of 3 times a week. 1 ounce meat alternate equals 1 ounce equivalent grain. Here's the components that make up the meal pattern for breakfast. Let's take a look at each individual component and its minimum serving sizes by age group. For each meal pattern, breakfast, lunch and supper, and snack, they're all set up in the same format. The column headings are food components and food items, ages 1-2, ages 3-5, ages 6-12, ages 13 through 18, including at-risk after-school programs and emergency shelters, and adult participants. The food components and food items are listed along the left-hand side of the document. After each component, the minimum serving size is listed under each age group. You may notice a small number next to some of the components. Each of these numbers corresponds with a footnote under the meal pattern. These footnotes provide additional information or directions for some of the components. Fluid milk is the first component listed in the breakfast meal pattern. Under each age group, you can see the minimum amount of milk that must be served in order for the meal to be creditable and reimbursable. Children ages 1-2 need a minimum of 4 fluid ounces. Ages 3-5 also need to be offered a minimum of 4 fluid ounces. The rest of the age groups all need to be offered a minimum of 8 fluid ounces. Remember, as the meal planner or the person serving the meal, these minimum amounts are what need to be offered. It is always up to the child to decide how much, if any, they choose to eat. Reimbursement is based solely on offering a creditable meal. Here's a quick reminder of what we learned earlier in the presentation about the kinds of milk that need to be served according to the child's age group. 12 to 24 month or ages 1-2 must be offered whole milk only. Ages 2 through 18 and adults must be offered non-fat, skim, or 1% flavored. Flavored milk is never creditable for children under 6, and 2% is not a fat content of milk that can be offered. When an infant is moving from breast milk or formula to whole milk, It is allowable to offer breast milk or formula and introduce whole milk for a 30-day period as the child transitions to whole milk. The only thing you have to make sure of is that the child is offered a minimum of 4 ounces total. How you get to that 4 ounces is completely up to you. The next food component in the breakfast meal pattern is vegetables, fruit, or portions of both. This is the only time where the vegetable and fruit component is combined in the meal pattern. Oftentimes, fruit seems to be the natural food item at breakfast, but know that you are able to offer some vegetables if you like. Ages 1 to 2 must be offered a minimum of 1/4 of a cup. The rest of the age groups must all be offered a minimum of 1/2 a cup. The third component that needs to be offered at breakfast is grains. You recall from our previous discussion that at least 1 serving per day across all eating occasions must be whole grain rich. Minimum serving sizes for grains is 1/2 ounce equivalent for ages 1 to 5, 1 ounce equivalent ages 6 through 18, and 2 ounce equivalent for adult participants. If you recall, I mentioned that a meat alternate may be served a maximum of 3 times a week in place of a grain item. This is a great opportunity to get some protein in at breakfast. This slide shows a list of meat alternates that may be offered, along with the minimum serving sizes. The amount of ounce equivalent meat alternate is the same as the ounce equivalent grain for each of the age groups. If you choose to offer a meat alternate more than 3 times a week, you can, but those foods do not count towards making a creditable or reimbursable meal. Let's do a practice question. Let's say you want to serve yogurt at breakfast to your 1 to 2-year-olds once per week. If you want to serve the yogurt in place of a grain as part of a reimbursable breakfast, how much yogurt should you serve? 1/8 of a cup, 1/4 of a cup, 1 tablespoon of yogurt, or 1/2 a tablespoon of yogurt? We're going to look at the previous table, and you can see on this list, you're going to look under ages 1 to 2 and 3 to 5, but we're talking about 1 to 2. Then on that the left-hand side, you're going to go all the way to the bottom and you're going to see yogurt, and you'll find your answer. So how much are we going to serve them? 1/4 of a cup. You need to serve at least 1/4 cup or 2 ounces of yogurt in place of a grain item. Let's move on to the lunch supper meal pattern. You'll notice that the format is the same as the breakfast meal pattern. Again, we've got the food components and food item heading, all of the age group headings, and then down the left-hand side, we have all of the components that can be offered. It looks a little bit different because all of the meat alternate options are listed. And of course, the vegetable group is listed as a separate component. Same thing though, after each component, the minimum serving size is listed under each age group. The entire meal pattern, along with footnotes, can be found on the training resources slide located at the end of this presentation. Fluid milk is the first component listed in the lunch and supper meal pattern. Under each age group, you can see the minimum amount of milk that must be served in order for the meal to be creditable and reimbursable. Children ages 1 and 2 need a minimum of 4 fluid ounces. Ages 3 to 5 need to be offered a minimum of 6 fluid ounces. The rest of the age groups all need to be offered a minimum of 8 fluid ounces. Here's a quick reminder of what we learned earlier in the presentation about the kinds of milk that need to be served according to the child's age group. The meat alternate component at lunch and supper is where the children receive the majority of their protein from. You have lots of options at lunch and supper for what you want to offer your children under this component. The meat alternate food items that you can put on your menu include lean meat, poultry or fish, tofu, soy products or alternate protein products, cheese, eggs, cooked dry beans or peas, peanut butter or soy nut butter or other nuts and seed butters, yogurt, plain or flavored, unsweetened or sweetened. And the following items may be used to meet no more than 50% of the requirement: peanuts, soy nuts, tree nuts, or seeds as listed in program guidance, or an equivalent quantity of any combination of the meat alternates listed. There is a lot of information to look at in this slide. Each age group is identified with the green rectangle. We're going to break it down a little bit more so it's a little easier to digest. Again, specifically talking about meats and meat alternates. So ages 1 to 2, this age group must be offered a minimum serving of 1 ounce equivalent meat alternate. The table shows the meat alternates along with their serving sizes. Here's the meat alternate serving sizes for ages 3 through 5. This age group must be offered a minimum serving of 1.5 ounce equivalent. Again, you see all the meat alternate choices and serving sizes. Here's the meat alternate serving sizes for ages 6 through 12 and 13 to 18, including at-risk after-school programs and emergency shelters. This age group must be offered a minimum of 2 ounce equivalent meat alternate. And here's the meat alternate serving sizes for adult participants. This group must also be offered a minimum of 2 ounce equivalent. Let's move on to the vegetable component and minimum serving sizes per age group. You can see that ages 1 and 2 must be offered 1/8 of a cup. Ages 3 to 5 must be offered 1/4 of a cup. Ages 6 through 12, 13 through 18, and adult participants must all be offered a 1/2 cup minimum. Next, we move to the fruit component and minimum serving sizes per age group. The minimum serving sizes for fruits is ages 1 to 2, 1/8 cup, ages 3 to 5, 1/4 of a cup. That's the same for ages 6, 12, and ages 13 through 18, 1/4 of a cup. And adult participants need to be offered a 1/2 a cup. Don't forget, vegetables are also able to be served to meet the entire fruit requirement at lunch or supper. Keep in mind that 2 different kinds of vegetables must be served if you're choosing this option. Here's the grain component and the minimum serving sizes per age group. Ages 1 through 5 both need 1/2 ounce equivalent. Ages 6 through 12 and 13 through 18 need a 1 ounce equivalent. And adult participants need 2 ounce equivalent. And last but not least, the snack meal pattern. You'll notice again the format is the same as breakfast, lunch, and the supper meal patterns. When planning or serving the snack meal, you only have to select 2 of the 5 components for a reimbursable meal. Only one of the 2 components may be a beverage. Best practice would be to offer water when there isn't another beverage offered. Fluid milk is the first component listed in the snack meal pattern. Under each age group, you can see the minimum amount of milk that must be served in order for the meal to be creditable and reimbursable. Children ages 1 and 2 and 3 to 5 need a minimum of 4 fluid ounces. The rest of the age groups all need to be offered a minimum of 8 fluid ounces. Again, the milk requirements are the same for the snack as they were at breakfast, lunch, and supper. The meat alternate component at snack is identical to breakfast, lunch, and supper. The meat alternate food items that you can put on your that you can choose are for the menu are shown on the slide. Here are the minimum serving sizes for snack. As with any of the components with the snack meal pattern, only 2 components have to be offered. If you choose to, larger portion sizes than specified can be served to children 13 to 18 to meet their nutritional needs. Larger portions can be served at all meals if you want, but you want to make sure that you are weighing the amount of extra food you are giving and comparing that to the amount of reimbursement you receive for a meal. It's always a bit of a balancing act. The minimum amount of vegetables that must be offered for snack is larger than those offered at any of the other meals. Ages 1 through 5 must be offered a half a cup. Ages 6 through 12 must be offered 3/4 of a cup. Ages 13 through 18, also 3/4 of a cup. And adult participants, a half a cup. The same thing is true of the fruit component at snack. The minimum amount of fruit that must be offered for snack is larger than those offered at any of the other meals. Of course, we remember that we're only selecting 2 of the 5 components in the snack program for a reimbursable meal. The serving sizes here are the same as the vegetable component. The last component that may be offered at snack is grains. You recall from our previous discussion that at least 1 serving per day across all eating occasions must be whole grain rich. Minimum serving sizes for grains is 1/2 ounce equivalent for ages 1 through 5, 1 ounce equivalent ages 6 through 18, and 2 ounce equivalent for adult. Let's practice identifying a creditable snack. Today's snack menu uses a grain component and a fruit component. Is a strawberry-filled cereal bar and apple slices considered a creditable snack? And they are served in the right amounts, but we need to know if those are considered creditable. The answer is no. While apple slices is a creditable fruit, the cereal bar is a grain-based dessert and not creditable in CACFP. So don't get caught on that. Best practices. Water is not a food component in the CACFP. Consider offering water throughout the day to children. Think about offering water at snacks when milk is not offered. Another best practice, consider including many colors of vegetables and fruits when the menus are written and served. As we wrap up our training today, remember, getting to know the components and meal pattern helps you plan well-balanced, nutritious meals and snacks for the children in your care. Here are a list of references that will provide additional information in today's presentation. Congratulations on completing this presentation. This ends our training.